In a career-spanning interview on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast, Man of Steel writer David S. Goyer agreed with host Joshua Horowitz that Warner Brothers should have developed a standalone Superman sequel with Henry Cavill instead of attempting to mount a cinematic universe with Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. The studio did so in order to compete with Marvel. So let's stop it there for the time being and tell you what I think about this. Because the thing is with these situations, and I suppose it's the same thing with cancel culture, which I want to talk about Joss Whedon in cancel culture a little bit later on in this video. But you want both sides of this situation. DC wanted to make money out of DC. They wanted DC to be competitive both in entertainment fashion and financially. That was their prerogative. Now, he says they should have done a direct sequel to Man of Steel and not did Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice. But David, do you know why they pivoted without you and Christopher Nolan to Batman vs. Superman: Dawn of Justice? Because you decided to have Superman grab somebody's neck and twist it until it broke. That's on you. You lost that movie hundreds and hundreds of millions because you insisted on that decision. No way should Superman ever be doing that on a big screen or a small screen. Other characters can, but not Superman. You got it wrong. And if you didn't do that, and Man of Steel maybe made $2 billion, maybe over $100 billion, then you would have got to do your direct sequel. They would have been more receptive to you doing your direct sequel, which I believe would have been amazing because I love Man of Steel. At the time, I wasn't that triggered about Superman killing Zod and breaking his neck. But I can understand die-hard DC fans and Superman fans and general audiences saying, wait a minute, this is wrong on so many levels. I'm not going to go back and rewatch this movie, even though it's a pretty cool movie. I can't take my child to watch this movie. I can't take my child watch Superman grab somebody's neck and twist it till it breaks. Right? You want children there. You want mums and dads and mums and mums and dads, whatever type of family you have, to go to these movies and watch them together. Right? So when people say, well, the studio wanted to be like the MCU, that's supposed to be some horrible, evil, Antichrist kind of thing to do. No, that was the studio's priority. But it was their prerogative to do that, but they put the wrong people in charge to do it. Christopher Nolan, David Goyer and Zack Snyder are not the people you put in charge of a project of a cinematic universe to attract the mainstream audience and families. You would have known that. The problem is at the time, this all stemmed from David Goyer having an idea while having writer's block on The Dark Knight Rises. He wanted to make a Superman first contact story, right? So because the Dark Knight trilogy was such a success, the studio went, as you would, why not? What could possibly go wrong? With Goyer's history, writing graphic novels and being involved with DC, and I think he's been involved with Marvel as well, why not? Although they should have looked at his history with Blade 3, was it? Not the greatest at the end of the day, but I think he did a really good job with the Dark Knight trilogy, and he did a really good job with Man of Steel. But even Christopher Nolan said at the time, I had to stop David and say, I don't think this is a good idea, Superman breaking Zod's neck. But basically, Goyer explained it away, and Nolan took the bait, which was wrong. Nolan should have put his foot down. Nolan could smell a rat. Nolan knew this was problematic. It should never have been allowed to even be shot to make the final cut. It was a mistake. Now, this is very, very interesting because I want to talk about an Aquaman and a Lost Kingdom spoiler that's got out there now because I've seen a test screening, as you know. I've seen this. I told you it's a Wrath of Khan movie. Same situation, but different. Because I'm going to give you an Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Big spoiler now. If you don't want to hear this spoiler, please go away. You still here? Right. Okay. In Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom. Now, I've already told you this is a Wrath of Khan movie. A dark movie. Much darker than the trailer suggests. There's a moment in the film where Black Manta kills Aquaman's baby. That's right. You know you heard someone walked out of the test screening? That's the reason. It's all coming out now. For months they were telling us someone walked out the test screening like it's a shit movie. So you either want deep, dark, DC compelling movies, Snyderverse stands, or you support this movie for doing this. Because it's exactly the same thing you've been defending in Man of Steel for years. The difference is, a villain does it this time. A villain does it. Instead of Aquaman murdering someone, right? It's not Aquaman doing the killing. It's not the hero doing the killing. Quite right too. It's Black Manta. Because basically, Aquaman in the first film let Black Manta's father die. So you can see, you know, Black Manta's thinking here. How can I approve of someone killing a child? I can't. But it's fiction. And that idiot who walked out and was offended about that just doesn't get it. We want these compelling moments. But we don't want superheroes like Superman breaking people's neck. Now the question is, have they cut this from the movie? But this is something I've known about. This is why I hinted to you when the trailer came out. This is a Wrath of Khan movie, and it's not the light fare you think it is. So basically, the reason that David Goyer and Christopher Nolan were pushed off the property, because the studio knew it was basically their fault for doing the whole neck break thing. It was Goyer's fault for having Superman kill somebody, and not just kill somebody, because the way Superman kills Zod is utterly violent. In a lot of ways, it's quite sadistic. Is there anything worse than seeing, you know, a pure-hearted hero grab somebody's neck and break it? I mean, come on. There was no need for it. People have defended it within the story. I get it, he had no choice. Because David Goyer made sure he had no choice. So David Goyer here is saying that WB were wrong to go to Batman versus Superman rather than doing a Man of Steel sequel. Yes, David, that's what should have happened. But it's your own fault it didn't happen because you created a scenario that lost the studio money. So they didn't trust you anymore. And you wouldn't listen to them. They wanted a cinematic universe. They wanted a team up. They wanted their Marvel. Whether they wanted to rush to it or not, you could start off a DC cinematic universe with a Justice League movie. And if you're a good writer with imagination and knowledge of these characters, you could still make it work. You made a mistake, David, which made the studio nervous. You're part of the reason this didn't work, because the rest of Man of Steel is a lot less problematic than the neck breaking. Yes, there are problematic elements for die-hard Superman and DC fans in Man of Steel, because there's carnage everywhere, there's explosions, and obviously Superman can't be everywhere because they're trying to create a real-world Superman, and this was part of the problem. So people died in Man of Steel because that's what would have happened in real life. But we've spoken about that before, how problematic putting Superman in the real world is, because he's the genie in the bottle, he's wish fulfillment, and you can't do that to him. You can do it to any other character. So these are the mistakes that they made from the very beginning of the DCEU. So, yes, the studio wanted to create big profitability with DC. They just brought in the wrong people to do it. And when Goyer cost the studio so much money by the neck breaking of Zod, done by one of the purest, non-violent, peaceful superheroes in the history of superheroes, the movie lost money because of that writer. But the studio should never have allowed that movie to go out with that neck-breaking sequence. So it's on them as well. But they basically allowed Nolan to have his freedom. Nolan had so much power within the halls of power of WB at the time. So he and his boy Goyer would have gotten away with anything. But the reason WB got so nervous and removed Nolan and Goyer from writing the movie and put Zack Snyder in charge, which is another crazy decision, and said, you bring in your own writer. He brings in Terrier, which is a worse decision than having Goyer write a Superman movie. Because basically Terrier and Snyder are writing this really deep piece about what would happen in the real world with Superman. Some people would mistrust him, some people would love him. You know, someone like Luthor would go after him. Of course. But as I say, putting Superman in the real world is a bit problematic. Also, think about this for a minute. At the end of Man of Steel, I've spoken about this before again, but we're talking about this, so let's get into this. And at the end, you've got Clark smiling at Lois. Welcome to the planet, Lois says. And you think, wow, the next movie is going to be quite lighter, isn't it? Look, we're here, we're in the Daily Planet, there's going to be banter, there's going to be a bit of fun, there's going to be romance, it's going to be Perry, Jenny, you know, the bald guy who's always cracking on to Lois and the other girl, right? He's great, he's from the comics, by the way. They didn't even use him in BVS. The actor who played him, Michael Kelly, brilliant actor, should have been used all throughout this franchise. Now, it's not a big deal. It didn't cost. It wasn't the problems that BVS, you know, created, right? But, and I love BVS. I love the Snyderverse. But you can't do that when you're trying to make DC profitable and valuable for a general audience. The studio want to make money. If the studio don't make money, they can't fund the smaller artistic movies. That's the point. And DC is there to be a profitable IP. So when you hear like David Goyer go, yeah, they should have done Man of Steel 2, but they just wanted to chase Marvel. Of course they did. In which business have you ever heard people not chasing their competitors to be as profitable and as successful as they are? Why do you think there's a Pepsi-Cola? Because there's a Coca-Cola, right? But they had the wrong people in charge, right? That's the problem. If you want kind of epic visual masterpieces, Lord of the Rings type movies, Zack Snyder is great. Goyer and Nolan are great. But that's not what's going to make you the most money. Kevin Feige came up with something very interesting. A television series on screen, movie to movie, a cinematic universe. But you still got to execute it in the right way. And I mean, I could do another video about the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and as soon as they became successful because of the first Avengers film, how success changes your mentality. And it really was from the success of Avengers that their mentality changed, and that was a shame. But in terms of DC, you know, you can't chase something successful when you're shaving against the grain. Snyder will always shave against the grain. Rian Johnson will always shave against the grain. They're those types of filmmakers, storytellers, and directors, and they're not the people to be running or making Star Wars movies. That's the point. That's why Lucasfilm didn't allow Snyder to get anywhere near Star Wars. Although it would have been interesting to see what he would have done, but he would have had the same problems he had with WB. You've got to understand the full-rounded situation. WB want to make money. Snyder wants to make decisions that won't make them money. So both people have a place in the argument and are justified and have logic in what they're saying. But the studio basically were in love with Nolan and Goyer. So you can understand why they made the mistake of allowing them to run things. But first of all, Man of Steel was just going to be a movie. There was no cinematic universe. And then later on, they realised that Man of Steel could launch something. That's why you get the Wayne satellite, the Luthor Corp truck, and all that. They're building a world beyond Superman, which is great. But really, that was an afterthought. So basically, David Goyer can say the studio made a mistake pivoting to BVS, but you put that situation. You started that situation. Because if Man of Steel made over $1 billion, if you didn't have Superman break somebody's neck in a live-action movie, then you would have got to tell your direct sequel. So in fact, David, it's more your fault than the studio's. So anyway, I know the pressure we were getting from Warner Brothers. which was, we need our MCU, we need our MCU. And I was like, let's not run before we walk, Goyer said. The other thing that was difficult at the time was there was this revolving door of executives at Warner Brothers and DC. Every 18 months, someone new would come in. We were just getting whiplash. Every new person was like, we're going to go bigger. So, right, let's just take this, for example, right? So, he's blaming the fact that there was new executives coming in every time. You know, look, this is the consistency of Marvel. They just had Feige. Feige was there because Feige was successful, right? So, and no one was interfering. Even when he went to Disney. At first, Disney weren't interfering. They have been since Phase 4. That's why it's been a problem. But Feige's been there because Feige's been successful. Warner Brothers is a different company and studio to Disney and has always been run very differently. Even when Disney was a huggy, cartoony kind of entertainment place, it was still always run in a very different way. So executives come and go. You wanted to, you know, and was it that bad that they wanted to get bigger and bigger and bigger? Was it bad that these executives had ambition? No, I'm not going to attack WB for wanting to be bigger. They're your employers, right? You've got to work around what they want. You've got to have discussions and have a compromise. But the problem is with people like Zack Snyder, David Goyer and Christopher Nolan, there is no compromise. And believe you me, they're talented people. Man of Steel is a great movie. But this is the problem. So, you know, executives coming through the door every 18 months shouldn't really affect you. If they want to get bigger, but put your story around that. At the end of the day, right, it was problematic what they were doing. But I'll tell you again, if Man of Steel made over $1 billion, they wouldn't have had any legitimacy or any kind of justification, and they wouldn't be going after Goyer. They wouldn't be putting pressure on Goyer, Nolan and Snyder to do things the way they wanted. Because Man of Steel would have been successful. And I know studios and I know studio executives. If your project is successful, they're going to leave you the fuck alone. And David, I'll go back to your original decision of having Superman kill Zod. If you didn't do that, you would have had $1 billion movie and they would have let you do whatever the fuck you wanted. Just like they allowed you and Chris to do whatever the fuck you wanted with the Dark Knight trilogy. Success breeds freedom. But you didn't have that success because you did the wrong thing. So we continue. I remember at one point, the person running Warner Brothers at the time had this release that pitched the next 20 movies over the next 10 years, but none of them had been written yet. Goyer continued in amazement. It was crazy how much architecture was being built on air. This is not how you build a house, right? Let's get into this again, right? So basically, someone at Warner Brothers who was running it had a vision, was ambitious. So he had a vision for the next 20 movies. So what you do, and what Christopher Nolan does, and what Zack Snyder does, go, okay, let's look at this. 20 movies, okay. Well, you can only work on one movie at a time, and that's fine. But the idea is not wrong. To say, here's, like, we've got a vision for the next 20 movies, right? That's good. That's thinking ahead. That's not wrong. And you as a creative have to say, right, what's movie number 1 out of the 20, right? We've got to make sure that we've got a vision, that it's shared throughout. Snyder had an idea for a vision, don't forget. But he's trying to justify his own failure by pointing the finger at WB. We were being built on air. No, you wasn't, David. They were ambitious. They wanted to think ahead. There's nothing wrong with that. And all you have to do as creatives is say, right, there's 20 movies here. That's good, because at least you know where you all stand. So you get them each movie, you look at them and you say, right, this is how we're going to do it. This is our plan. And you know, You bring in other creatives to do these movies. In fact, there's nothing wrong with what Warner Brothers, or this particular Warner Brothers executive, wanted to do. So again, he's just, basically, this is a bitter, angry creative who didn't get to do his Man of Steel sequel. I understand, because I want to see that sequel as well. And we're never going to see it, and it's very, very sad. But, you know, this is what happens. If I speak to someone who used to date someone and it didn't end well, they're going to sit there telling me all the bad things about them and not the good things about them. So again, I'm not taking David's side on this one either. Goyer worked closely with Christopher Nolan on the Dark Knight trilogy, and the two conceived of a Superman movie that will become Zack Snyder's 2013 tentpole Man of Steel. Goyer wrote the film, but Cavill never got a chance to lead another standalone Superman movie, as the remainder of the time in the Crimson Cape was spent in universe-building tentpoles such as Batman vs Superman and Justice League. Now, let's talk about this, right? In Batman vs Superman, Superman was used in a certain way. It was Batman's movie and Superman was there, but the shell of the story was really Superman. It was about Superman. It was about how the world should react to Superman. So Henry gets a lot of screen time in that movie, but you have to question, was the way Superman was used the right thing for Superman as a character? Again, I love BVS, but this is not how you use Superman if you want to make money and if you want to create a cinematic universe. It's not the fact that Batman vs Superman is a team-up, a crossover movie. It's the way you use your characters. So then let's look at Justice League, whether it's Justice League or Zack Snyder's Justice League, right? So in Justice League, whether it's Justice League or Zack Snyder's Justice League, basically we don't see Henry Cavill's Superman until the final act of the movie. Or should I say, not the final act, but, you know, the final third of the movie. So you've got a Justice League movie, which in your imagination as a kid, you would imagine Superman's leading that Justice League. It's all through him. He's a big part of the movie. He's certainly the heart of the movie, but he's not there because Superman's dead, and that's the whole point of the movie. And I said at the time, you should never be doing a Superman rebirth story via a Justice League movie. And I always said this was a huge mistake from Zack Snyder and Chris Terrio. I always said it, and I stand by it. So again, it's not the fact that we had a Justice League movie so quickly. It's not the fact that we had BVS instead of Man of Steel 2. It's the way Superman was used. Again, David Goyer is pivoting to something without, you know, yes, you should have done a Man of Steel 2. You should have done a Green Lantern movie. You should have done a Flash movie before you did all of this. I get it. But there's still a way of having Man of Steel, BVS. Suicide Squad shouldn't have even came so early. I said it at the time. But anyway, Suicide Squad, David Ayer's version, right? Again, that would have caused problems because it would have been controversial. Wonder Woman was great. Justice League was terrible. You know, that inconsistency. But if you use the characters in the right way in BVS and in Justice League, if Superman's used properly in those movies and you don't kill him so soon, then there's a way of handling it. So it's not just about, oh, it was shared and that was the problem. No, there's good ways. Creatively, you've got the clay. It's how you mold it, whether you make a mess of it or you make a success of it. Prior to getting Batman and Superman movies off the ground, Goyer wrote all three Blade movies. Oh, he wrote all three of them, starring Wesley Snipes. He even directed the third film, Blade Trinity, which was shit. He confirmed on the Happy, Sad, Confused podcast that he originally worked with David Fincher on bringing Blade project to life. So I don't really want to talk about Blade. So anyway, there's something else that he mentioned on the Happy and Confused podcast, that Top Gun director Tony Scott was Christopher Nolan's first choice for Man of Steel. This would have been a much better choice, yes. Now, Snyder makes it look beautiful, but the experience of Tony Scott and what he would have brought to a Superman movie certainly would have been my preferred choice. Tony Scott probably told them to piss off, especially once he saw the script. But whether you got Tony Scott, Tony Smith, or Alan Arkin, it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, Superman still breaks Zod's neck. People are going to be upset. You see, there's two types of Superman fans, or different types of Superman fans actually. So there's the Snyder fans. A lot of the Snyder fans weren't Superman fans before they saw Man of Steel. Man of Steel made them basically Superman fans, right? So they're happy with that kind of Superman. But they didn't consume him beforehand. So they hate the Reeves-verse, they hate Smallville, they hate everything else but what Snyder did. But then there's us lot who have consumed the comics, the movies, the George Reeves show, the Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher show, which is brilliant. Smallville, all brilliant. We accept that all these are, you know, Superman Returns, all of these, right? That these are brilliant but flawed works in the Superman mythos. But Snyder fans just think it's all about the Snyderverse. Nothing else matters, right? Because they live in an echo chamber. They live in a glass house. So this is what being a stan is all about. And I think, you know, that is really the true issue here in the divide we've got right now. But for me, right, now I always wanted a Man of Steel direct sequel. I think it's absolutely sacrilege that Snyder and Terrio skipped the story of the Codex. What happened? What happened to the Codex? He had 1 billion Kryptonian refugees' DNA inside him, in his DNA, Superman. So a Man of Steel sequel, Goyer could have had Brainiac extract those refugees' DNA, and imagine having 1 billion. Imagine having 1 billion Kryptonians on Earth, and the problem, and that would be an amazing movie, right? Maybe that's what Goyer was planning, maybe that's not what Goyer was planning. But we could have seen that direct sequel if David Goyer wasn't so selfish. And this is the problem with some creatives today. They're selfish. They want to do what they want to do above the health of the IP and the project. Was it right for Superman and his fans, right, for Superman to basically break somebody's neck on the screen? No, it was wrong. But because they're so self-absorbed with what they want to do, because Goyer wanted to make a real-world Superman, that's what his mistake was. Man of Steel is a great, exciting, pulsating superhero Superman movie. But it's the collateral damage, it's the killing of Zod that really created a problem for that movie. There's other few nitpicks people had. You know, Jonathan Kent going back for the dog. I mean, I think most dog owners would do that, but you can question that. So there are nitpicks. Everyone has nitpicks. But if you don't have the collateral damage, right? If you don't have Zod being murdered by Superman, that movie makes $1 billion, I guarantee you. And if that movie makes $1 billion, there would have been no Justice League. There would have been no studio interference. Because as I say, if a film's successful, and if the people who made the film successful made it successful, they're going to leave you alone to do whatever the hell you want. So the responsibility lies with David Goyer here. And he can point the finger at the studio all day long. But ultimately, David, the problem was with you. You know how I've been saying for ages that DC Studios doesn't seem to have any employees and it doesn't feel like a real studio? Well, that's changing because we've got some very, very important news which kind of seems that DC Studios is now becoming a proper studio and they're taking this situation with James Gunn very, very serious. So basically, James Gunn's DC films will be based out of Warner Brothers Leavesden Studios. So basically, they're going to be there on the lot. They're going to have their own bit on the lot, which is very, very exciting. Because, like it or not, this is what we should have had back in 2012 when they were making Man of Steel. A DC Studios. And people that wanted to make DC movies, that weren't shaving against the grain. As I say, I love the Snyderverse. I love Snyder, don't mistake me. But, you know, the reason WB own the DCeu IP is to make money from it. Already Gunn has been selling more comics than anyone else that's been at DC since Man of Steel was released, because he knows how to do it. He was talking about, you know, Superman for All Seasons. We discussed it yesterday. He's already probably sold a bunch of those comics. But the important thing is to make new great comics. That's the problem at DC and Marvel right now. They've become so political and they're upsetting comic book fans. But this is what we're going to get. So anyway, Gunn will be personally involved in its development. So this is very, very interesting. He's the co-CEO of DC Studios. They're now going to be based out of Warner Brothers Leavesden Studios, which is very exciting. And Gunn will be a big part of that development. So Gunn is running this thing front and center. So whether it succeeds or fails, he either gets the pat on the back from me and everybody else, or he gets blamed. He's already been blamed by me and a bunch of other people already for the failure of these DCEU movies. But now I think there has been mixed messaging that hasn't been great, no question about that. His involvement of not doing a full reboot is problematic, and his interference in a couple of the movies hasn't been great. But let's be absolutely clear. Whether James Gunn or Jimmy Smith is involved as DC co-CEO, those shitty, crappy DCEU movies were always going to fail. And blaming Gunn totally for that is ridiculous. And just because these movies have flopped, it doesn't mean what he's planning is going to flop as well. He clearly has big plans. These are the plans we should have had back in 2012 when they were making Man of Steel, and things would have ended up very differently. The question is now, is it too little too late, or can Gunn actually be successful? Well, we don't know, but as a DC fan, I want him to be successful. I don't want him to fail. I know if you're a Snyderverse stan, you pray every night that this man fails. I get it. I get where you're coming from, right? It's a complicated issue. But I'm not here for any director. I love Snyder. I love Snyder's DC movies. I love Gunn's DC stuff and Marvel stuff as well. So he's capable of doing something. Now, I've had my doubts about him making a Superman movie. But is he capable of making it work with Superman? Of course he is. Because if he puts the stuff in the movie that people want from Superman, because there's this kind of arguments from Snyderverse stands, well, people just want winks and smiles. That's not what we want. We want Superman to be Superman. We want these creators to stop being ashamed of who Superman is. The thing is, Snyderverse stands, the only Superman you've experienced is Zack Snyder's Superman. And I love him. I love Henry. I love their Superman. But for most people, that isn't the Superman they want. I'm sorry about that, but they want Superman to be Superman. That's the one thing that James Gunn, we know he's going to do, make Superman Superman. So let's read on. Warner Brothers Discovery has announced ambitious plans to expand its Warner Brothers Studios Leavesden, its UK-based television and film studio, which will see the facility grow by an additional, fucking hell, 400,000 square feet. Wow, let's get rid of this pop-up. Or let's just scroll up. Of square feet of production and support space, an additional 10 stages that will expand the available number of sound stages by 50%. From 19 to 29. Wow. So they're spending money on DC Studios. They believe in James Gunn's plans. As a DC fan, I have to applaud the ambition at this at the very least. So this excites me. Yes, this makes me happy. The development is particularly thrilling for James Gunn and Peter Safran, the creative minds behind DC Studios, as Leavesden is set to become their primary production hub. They are expected to provide valuable input on the design and features of the new facilities, collaboratively developed with the input from their Rivers District Council and Watford Borough Council. So if you're American, you wouldn't have heard this. We're talking about the UK, where I'm from, of course, so I know all about this. Endeavour is poised to generate 4,000 job opportunities across the United Kingdom, which is great. Furthermore, the studio's contribution to the UK economy is forecasted to increase by over £200 million. Wow! This is exciting. Warner Brothers Studios Leavesden is globally recognised for its exceptional sound stages and facilities, with this planned expansion adding significant capacity and capabilities. It will be home to even more incredible storytelling for both film and television projects, said Warner Brothers Discovery Chief Operating Officer Simon Robinson. In a statement, we are proud to not only be growing our production in Leavesden and making it the main hub for DC Studios, but also to be growing our economic and community contributions to the UK's creative sector. Wow! Leavesden also serves as the home of the Warner Brothers Studio Tour London, the making of Harry Potter, which houses a permanent exhibition of sets, props and costumes which were used in the making of the Harry Potter series, and includes a full replica of the Great Hall as well as the Forbidden Forest, basically blah, 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 blah. So basically there's a lot of stuff filmed there. So yes, this is very, very exciting news. As I say, for months I've been saying, this DC Studios is just a studio in name only. We haven't heard things like this. We haven't heard who's going to work there. All of a sudden, ambitious plans like this, because Leavesden, Warner Brothers Leavesden in the UK is huge. Great sound stages. And to be based there and to be making your films there away from California, away from the US, away from the hub, away from Hollywood is very, very important. It means James and his teams and his different producers and directors and writers can focus about making great content. So this is a very, very ambitious plan. For those of you who are praying for this not to happen before it even happens, it won't. We are getting Superman Legacy, which clearly is going to be filmed out in the UK in WB Leavesden. So that's very, very exciting because, of course, Superman the movie was also shot in the UK. Superman Returns was shot outside of America and Hollywood as well, of course, in Australia at Fox Studios. So anyway, DC Studios is happening. They're getting bigger. They're going to be based in the UK. So this is very, very exciting news. And as I say, this is what I want. This is what I always wanted, to be professionals, to do the right thing, because Warner Brothers have the reach and the finance to do these type of things, be professional about DC and do the right things. And as a DC fan, how can I not be excited by this? Let's talk about cancel culture. With the Russell Brand situation, what you get with cancel culture is the accused is silenced and everyone says whatever they want about the accused. This is what happened in terms of Joss Whedon when Ray Fisher exposed him for his conduct on the Justice League set. But Joss Whedon never got to put his side of the story, because that's how cancel culture works. It's about revealing something and everyone getting an axe and smashing you over the head with it until there's nothing of you left. But the problem is, Joss Whedon did have a side of the story. Do I agree with them recycling Zag's movie? No. You know that I fought to help release the Snyder Cut. And I'm glad I've got it in my collection. It's one of the best comic book movies of all time. That's a factual statement. But it still doesn't matter. None of that matters. In an argument, everyone has a right to give you their point of view. What happened with Joss Whedon and later on the stuff being revealed on Buffy, lots of things were being revealed about what happened on Buffy. Again, Joss didn't get to say his side of the story. Maybe he did those things on the Buffy set, maybe he didn't. Or maybe they weren't exactly how they were sold to be. Bryan Singer has been accused of so many things, bad things. But has he gone to prison? Has he been prosecuted? No. Kevin Spacey basically stood trial for what he was accused of and proved his innocence. Whether there wasn't enough evidence or whatever else, in a court of law, he was proved not guilty. But the problem with cancel culture is that you only get one side of the story and it's never the accused person. Just because you accuse someone of something, it doesn't make it true. It also doesn't make it untrue. Basically, Amber Heard made all these accusations about Johnny Depp, but then we got the full picture from Johnny. That basically, they were both as bad as fucking each other. They were both abusing each other, and it should never have been in the public domain. And Johnny Depp should never have been cancelled and been fired by Disney and Warner Brothers, while she's just basically made another movie because she married a famous guy. So that's the problem with it. So we never got Joss Whedon's side of the story. I would love to interview Joss Whedon. Yes, I would, right? I love Zack Snyder. I think what they did to him was wrong. But I want to ask Joss, when you came onto the Justice League set, were the actors receptive to you? Were they aggressive? Were they toxic towards you? How did they respond to you? Do you feel they made you, act the way you were? Do you think they could have been more supportive? How were the cast and crew towards you, Joss? Did you warn the studio about recycling Zack Snyder's movie? Did you see the problems in doing it? In the cheap way you did Steppenwolf so he was less scary. Were you concerned about that? Was that the studio? Was that Jeff Johns pushing you to do that? These are the things that I would ask. Not Jeff Johns, but Joss Whedon, right? He was involved in the first Toy Story, Buffy, Angel. He basically made the first CBM that teamed up the Marvel heroes, and it was a huge success. So the man is a genius. Just because you're good at something, just because you're successful, doesn't mean you can get away with doing bad things. And I'm not saying that, but we never got his side of the story, and I would love to get that. And I would love it to be on this channel, because I'm fed up of living in a world where we only get one side of the story.